We want the funk.
One sad tuba player.
Dark Matter, 9 episodes, felt nothing.
Kirsten's first reaction to strangers is to pull a knife.
Kirsten, I'm so sorry.
Oh, I met a new friend.
The Traveling Symphony is the Broadway of the wheel.
This slaps because you just don't get this.
Hello and welcome to Road Goes Ever On and On. Today, Sterling and I are talking about the hit Max TV show Station 11, Episode 2, so spoilers ahead. And if you like the content, it would help the channel out a lot by giving us a like. And if you want to stay up to date with our videos, just hit that subscribe button and turn on that bell for notifications, and we'll stay up to date in your feed. And with that, Sterling, should we talk about some more filmmaking and storytelling techniques?
Absolutely. Once again, they are nailing it with this.
So
and I thought it was interesting storytelling wise to put us into a world that I think is like somewhat reminiscent with post-apocalyptic stories, but also not completely. Like I think we see that with Year 2, where there's a lot of fear and uncertainty of like, who are you? And are you bad? And what's going to happen? But by year 20, I feel like there's a surprising mix of like happiness and hope, as well as still fear and uncertainty that I don't expect in this genre.
Yeah, I actually love this take on year 20 because every time, you know, like Mad Max, zombie apocalypse, it's always, you know, like The Walking Dead, it's always like, hey, I'm going to try to survive. I'm not going to help you. And I think that does a disservice to humanity because I do think that at a certain point, communities would band together and there would be a lot of people pitching in to like help make sure that everybody has resources. And I do believe that that's where a post-apocalyptic world would end up. And you don't see a lot of that.
Right. So it was nice kind of seeing that. And it was nice to see such a bright world. Like the lighting was absolutely gorgeous. I know that this may sound a little bit nerdy, but when I'm making thumbnails, like I try and take a shot from the episode, and then I generally have to do some kind of processing to brighten it up because so many of these shows just have so much filtering on them that they are just so dark and color graded and all of this other stuff. And I try and do something to brighten it up so you can actually see the visual when you're looking at it on your phone. And this one, there was nothing I had to do. Like the shots are so well lit and beautiful. The music is great and loud and you know, like vibrant.
I love the music in this.
Love the music.
Title card scene where they're playing "We Want the Funk," gotta have the funk, which then turns into diegetic music where the guy's playing it on the brass horn and just like so good.
Okay, you know what was so cool about turning that into diegetic music was that by starting it off with the song with the version we know, the recorded version, you know, that is so vibrant, you know, like it's so much fun. It's great, right? And starting off with that, it gives us that feel. And then when you see the reality of it, it's just one. Some people in our world might think of that as like one sad tuba player. and to us, seeing that world might seem kind of sad. But you see that from their perspective, like that is they don't have recorded music. They don't have like, you know, they don't have movies anymore. That one tuba player is bringing that level of energy. Like the song that we heard is how they feel.
Yes.
And that to me, that hit.
Oh
so
my gosh.
Much.
That wonderful. The other really cool thing about some of this music though, we just said that this has a very cheery, you know, like post-apocalyptic, you know, everybody, like we have communities that are growing. But also, like, what Kirsten's going through in this episode of, like, her, you know, trust of, you know, strangers and others. Like, throughout the episode, there was, like, a cello being played, like a very like somber, really like setting this like eerie feeling of like, everything is great. We're having music by the fire. We're putting on shows, but yet there's this underlying
Tension.
disturbance. Yeah. Oh my gosh. And
Yes.
it just built it the whole episode. It felt so good.
I know. I love the choice. So it seems like the show is definitely flashing back in this episode. I don't know if it continues to do that throughout the series, but I thought it was flashbacks can sometimes be a way to cheat, you
Mm-hmm.
know? Like it's a way to, by not showing things chronologically, they're able to withhold key information until it has impact later. And so I think it can sometimes be a little bit of a cheat, you know? In this case, I thought it was so brilliantly done because it was almost kind of like diegetic music where it's like in scene. The flashbacks were in scene, like they were her memories.
Yes.
So it wasn't the narrator choosing to show us this at this time to make something pop. She's going through that, and that's why we're experiencing it. And I don't know if it was like the strangers triggered that, or I don't know if it was like part of her process.
I took it as part of her process, like, because we're seeing her have a very emotional moment. Like, she's playing Hamlet, where Hamlet's father is killed, and she's getting the news that her parents are killed. And it seems like she's drawing from that to have this emotional moment. And how that whole scene was done, where it's the L cuts and the J cuts of her, doing her Hamlet lines with Jeevan and Frank finding out that her parents are dead, and also a song playing over that. And all three of these just making this beautiful scene of how she gets into character, how this has affected her life, which is the overall narrative of this episode about how she's losing people and how she deals with it, and how Kirsten is not okay with losing people because she's lost so many people. Just a phenomenal scene. Like, I was feeling teary in that scene. Dark Matter, 9 episodes, felt nothing. Episode 2, I'm like, Kirsten, I'm so sorry.
Well, and they kept. I think they kept building towards that emotional undercurrent throughout the episode, so that when it finally had that one crescendo, I mean, talk about music. Like
Yeah.
they really were controlling our emotions of having this kind of like the cello was creating this, tension. There was an emotional tension that was building, and it was building through more and more like scenes that were getting, or memories that were getting more and more upsetting, until it finally got to the most upsetting one. And by that point, it was overwhelming.
I don't even
That
know
was
if it's gonna be the most upsetting one, because Frank
right.
and
Well,
Jeevan.
yes, the most upsetting like that we've
Right.
seen so far, like it was so well done. And so, just as a quick, like, anybody that hasn't seen us talk about it, or doesn't necessarily know the term, J cuts, L cuts. You've got like the audio track on the bottom, video track above. If you have the audio for the next scene come in before the video, you're going to have a J-like shape where like the audio sticks out before the video. That's a J cut. If you have the video come in first and let the audio linger, it looks like an L. That's an L cut. I think in most of the times, like it helps to either like tie the scenes together, or helps you more easily transition from one scene to another. I think in this scene, it was used even more to kind of mix the scenes together and show how this other memory is affecting this current scene. So I felt like they were much longer than you normally see,
Yeah.
where like audio might be overlapping for a good chunk of time.
And it kept going back and forth, so it was like
Yes.
multiple cuts. So you'd hear her screaming about getting a text message, but also seeing the Hamlet play, but then Hamlet, as she's playing Hamlet, speaking over the news of like Jeevan and Frank receiving that news. Like, oh man, that was just such a beautiful scene. I I even feel like Kirsten grew in this episode. Like they showed growth of like her being upset that her friend Charlie was wanting to stay and raise the baby, calling her
Right.
selfish, being like, you're selfish, you don't even care about the symphony. And then later in the episode just being like, no, I was being selfish. Like such just this is crazy. This is such good writing.
Absolutely. And so I think that as a second episode, such an interesting choice. Like the first episode felt, once again, it set very big stakes, even though you didn't know what they were. Seeing those cuts of Chicago just covered in wilderness, and now once again, the stakes feel very personal. As I think Kirsten is trying to like hold on to her family, and she's lost so much, and it was just such an interesting kind of storytelling technique of still to a certain extent ignoring what is actually going on, still leaving that question.
With Kirsten losing her parents, it seems that she loses Frank and Jeevan shortly after, and since year 2 she joins the traveling symphony, and then year 3 she had Charlie in her life, and this was like the first person that she's had for such a long period of time that has not left her. Like if you think about it, this is the person that she's had longest in her life, and she's lost so many people, and now Charlie's being one of those people, and she just you feel for her. You feel that you don't want her to lose her family.
Yep. Yeah, she had her parents for the first 8 years of her life, and then we don't know what happened 2-3 years after that, and then she had her for 7-8 years. That's wild. So let's look at the
17 years because it's year 3 to year 20.
Yes, 17. Yes, wild.
Yeah,
Wild. Let's look at the world that they've created. This world of post-apocalypse.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this?
Well, like I was saying before, I think it's really great that we see this better version of humanity. It does seem that there are all these different communities around, like, and it seems like a path like called the wheel. It seems that
Yes,
all these communities are connected. I'm sure that they do trades with these communities. We see that there is a traveling symphony that is this almost like the symbol of hope. Like we're still creating art, we're still going around, giving this art to other communities, and I think it's a really cool depiction of a post-apocalyptic world.
it's interesting that it is. I said that this is a world that seems like it's got happiness and hope, but still has fear and uncertainty. I think that they are still hinting at trauma, possibly outside of the pandemic, that has happened. Because why? The place that the traveling symphony goes to, Saint Deborah by the Water. So, well, one, it's named after somebody who died in a chemical fire, which sounds horrific and doesn't sound like it's directly tied to the pandemic. So I think that hints at some trauma, but also they're not that far from Chicago, but they're living in very non-permanent structures. Are there not like, I know why they may not want to live in cities. Maybe there's fear of densely populated areas have a potential of like non-open spaces can more easily hide threats, but they're in like tents.
Well,
they're like in an encampment.
So I did have kind of a question about that. With
Yeah,
it does seem like the traveling symphony has tents, but when you look at the picture of where Saint Deborah is, they do seem like the structures are not as tent-like. It seems a little bit more permanent there.
but they were are you talking about like the globe things with like the?
Yeah. Those seem like a little bit better than tents. Like they had like a structure, like they're not moving those.
Yeah, they're better than tents, but they're not as good as homes.
True. Like you could just
like,
live in a suburb somewhere.
right, or even smaller than that, like a town. That seems very. I think that is hinting at something else. There's some reason why people are doing this.
Well, did you see at one point, when we had a flashback to Jeevan and Frank, and they're talking about she hasn't eaten in 3 days, he's taping something up on the top of the, like, almost maybe a vent or something.
That was, yeah, that's what I thought.
And so to me, I feel like he wasn't taping that for the flu because you're already breathing circulated air. I was wondering if, back to my previous theory of a nuclear winter, if somebody was shooting off nukes, and what if a lot of these cities are destroyed? A lot of these suburbs are destroyed, so they don't have anywhere to live, and that's why he was taping that up to make sure that the fallout doesn't come through.
It's so that's what I'm kind of getting at is there's it seems like there's something more than just the flu maybe going on that they've kind of hinted at. And I think that goes to the, even though the traveling symphony seems to be a family and a nice place to be, and this wheel seems like a place that the symphony trusts the people along the wheel. There's still, when we first see Sarah, she's got a gun.
Yeah.
Kirsten's first reaction to strangers is to pull a knife. There is a distrust, and she didn't seem to want to be far from the strangers like maybe they're sick. It seemed like a distrust of outsiders
Right.
and what they might do.
It
They keep hinting at things, and I want to know more.
well, it does seem, at least so far how I've interpreted it, that the flu like wiped out everybody, maybe wiped out itself because it didn't have enough people to kill. We hear a radio broadcast that says it kills, it's like 99% kill rate. So
I missed
maybe
that one.
maybe these are the 1% of people that are, immune to it or whatever, but I do think that societal structures broke down, and then year 2 everybody's like, we don't trust you. It's like we don't know what's going on. People are a little bit more trigger happy, and we see Kirsten is feeling terrible. Sarah's got a gun. She's like they're ready to kill and fight at that point. Where year 20, people have settled into their places. It's a lot less violence that they have to worry about. So,
Yeah.
but I do feel like there are some outsiders and that they still could pose threats.
Right. And it's interesting the difference between the people that lived through this, even if they were very young, like Kirsten, and people that are under 20, like Alex, that don't know that world and just so happily are like, oh, I met a new friend,
Yeah.
and doesn't understand that doesn't understand technology. Not that it matters anymore now that it's gone, but doesn't understand stranger danger.
Yeah.
It seems like these communities have, by taking care of each other, have built a certain level of protection, and maybe they don't stray from that, and that's why they don't have to worry about it. But you can definitely see that there is some tension with the idea of when strangers do come in, like, who are you and what are your intentions?
Yeah. And the one stranger, he definitely pointed out to Kirsten that she has that day zero pain, like that day zero
Right.
pain. Like anybody that experienced life before this, they all hold on to this feeling of like, can I trust you? Are you good? Are you bad? And we'll see that how that goes.
So talking about people under 20 and their different kind of sight of this, I thought it was interesting when Sarah kind of explicitly spelled it out, that kids are the only ones who can act worth a damn because everyone else is too traumatized. And I thought that's very telling of what people went through that lived through this.
Yeah.
And I guess, you can kind of see how a kid, if they're taken care of by a parent may be able to hide a bunch of, or a guardian, may be able to hide a bunch of things and kind of protects the kid from really knowing the truth of the matter. I think we did kind of see that with like Jeevan lying a few times about, it's not the end of the world, trying to protect her innocence.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just thought that was kind of interesting. But Traveling Symphony, first of
Yes.
all, I'm a theater nerd.
Oh yeah,
So
you are. You loved it.
loved it. Loved it. There's no movies. This is when they come around once a year, like Shakespeare or not, this is probably kind of like that one tuba player. This slaps
Oh
because you
yeah.
just don't get this.
Right. Well, even if you think about like a big Broadway play, like when you're in your section and it comes to town, like Wicked, Hamilton,
Yep.
everybody's excited to go see it. Like people want to go see the play, and if this is your only opportunity, like the Traveling Symphony is the Broadway of the wheel.
Right. I thought that was so interesting. I loved the bumper sticker or whatever the saying that was on there. Survival is insufficient. I think they're trying to make something new and positive in this world. And I loved so they do Shakespeare, and Shakespeare oftentimes has a play within a play, and the play within the play, if you look at it closely, is has broader significance, and it's kind of telling as to what is going on within the actual play that Shakespeare wrote. And I thought Hamlet was a great choice here because Hamlet is dealing with the loss of his dad, and I think she's struggling with her loss, especially especially knowing that she's about to lose her best friend, and she's lost so many more before that.
Yeah.
So
I thought Hamlet was a
I
great choice for talking about Kirsten's trauma and what she's going through in this
yes,
world. One little nod I liked to the whole Shakespearean thing, back in Shakespearean times, only
I see where you're going.
only men were allowed to be in the play, and so they played parts that were women. And Kirsten, being a woman, was playing the part of Hamlet. I liked that there was a little mix around with that.
Yes, yeah. Also, I think it's very telling that you've got a set troupe of people, and that troupe has to be able to do all of Shakespeare's plays. You don't get to audition a broader audience and get like the perfect person, and so clearly they have to deal with gender and race and whatever. They seem very just accepting,
Hmm.
where it's just the right person for the part. It doesn't matter about all of these other factors.
Right.
It's that you tell this this amazing story, and with like the confines.
Yeah.
I loved when they keep cutting back and forth, and young Kirsten texts one of her parents, not knowing that they're gone yet, and says, "I'm with a family." And then it cut to the Traveling Symphony, which I felt bared kind of like a dual meaning at that point.
Yeah.
Because she's remembering this, and she is with a new family now.
I loved those text messages. Whenever you use text message in film, there's always different ways you can do it. You can look over the phone, have the text bubbles pop up, and I think the way that they've done it has been great. But we did see on this time that it lingered twice, right? So like they popped up, "Hey mom, are you there? I'm safe." And when that happened, Jeevan and Frank were talking in a different language, which could be a little uneasy if like you don't know really what's going on, you don't know what they're saying about you. But I think it was lingering on "I'm safe" to be like I am safe, like I made it, and like that's what Kirsten is
Mm-hmm.
thinking that whole time. Same with the family, and then it transitions to the symphony. So it's just what she's lingering on. I'm safe, and I'm with a family. And I thought that was a
Yeah,
really cool way that they did that through those text messages.
loved it. Let's chat about Outsiders.
I think we should start with Dan joining the traveling circus. I'm just gonna say I loved his audition from Independence Day.
Dawn recognized that right away. She called it out. And once again, it was interesting that they was that the actual audio from Independence Day? And if not, they at least like edit it to make it sound like it was going through a mic.
I don't think it was the actual audio from Independence Day, but I do think that was a cool little technique because he picks up like a mic and it like screeches and he's like, oh, Sorry.
feedback.
But then he's
Yep.
talking through a blowhorn, which I thought was a nice little touch to that.
And once again, it does kind of put you in. I think being in theater and not getting a lot of theater, it can take you somewhere. And it was showing how, like, the people watching were there along with the performance to, like, really buy into it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is a welcoming community. Yes, he's tried 4 times before. Obviously, hasn't quite, nailed it, not quite ready. But they were still ready to welcome him back for another audition. I do think there's an interesting juxtaposition of how strangers are welcomed in here and what your response is. So in the very beginning, we see how Sarah responds to Kirsten, and there's a kid with a knife, but she puts her gun down and she offers water and food. And it's interesting seeing this juxtaposition and the warmth with which Dan is accepted into this group, and then kind of comparing that to some of the others. I mean, I guess Dan isn't completely like an outsider. They have seen him before. He keeps coming back. But it was interesting seeing it compared to, like, David and Cody.
Well, but the what's interesting is that it seems like Kirsten is very not trustworthy. So, or not trusting. She, even when Dan first shows up, she's kind of like, "Oh my god, not this guy again." Like, she doesn't want him to join, it seems like. But the rest of the troupe accepts him. They're like, "All right, do something not Shakespeare." And they're like, "All right, let's make some magic."
I love the advice that Kirsten gives Dan, and also the warmth that comes with giving that advice. There's a certain warmth in her giving him comforting information,
Mm-hmm.
rather than continuing to treat him like potentially a nuisance, but actually kind of helping him out. And also, I just love the advice, because it reminded me very much of acting is reacting,
Mm-hmm.
and so having a focus on the people around you. I think there's a lot of people in acting, not the people at the top, but a lot of people in acting that are looking for their moment to shine versus focusing on, and like what their character would do, versus focusing on other people and responding to them,
Mm-hmm.
rather than like you being the focus. So I love that little touch. Great advice.
That was good advice. And it does seem that Kirsten was hesitant to let him in, but once he was in, and maybe they'd been traveling for like a day or two, so maybe that's what it takes for her to accept him, but he did have more
Okay.
acceptance than the others. David and Cody, we see that, like, she is not accepting of them first, but the rest of the troop, like Alex and the other guy, I don't know his name, they were very much like, "Oh, we met them earlier with the troop back there." And so they
That's right.
did seem a little bit more accepting. It does seem just Kirsten has a hard time trusting strangers.
So I'm curious how much of it is that something terrible happened that made Kirsten not trust strangers, versus how much of it is Kirsten is damaged, she has lost a lot of people, and the easiest way to not lose more people is to not
Mm,
let people in,
that,
you know?
yeah.
Because she seems like the way that she was trying to fight to keep her friend from, staying in Deborah by the water seemed like a level of desperation.
Yeah.
And she lashed out at her friend. She left her friend, when her friend kind of needed her, and she's like, well, I need to go over my lines,
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of left her very dismissively. And it seemed very reactionary, kind of like the way that she reacted to these strangers. So I wonder what trauma it is. Like, is it distrust, or is it not wanting to have her heart broken, or both?
I mean, yeah, it does seem that whatever happened with her and Frank and Jeevan, there seems to be a distrust of outsiders.
I
Like,
think so, yeah.
when she first runs into Sarah, she's got her knife on her, like ready to fight Sarah, and then Sarah gives her all the, water, the food. So I think she she's distrustful of people coming into her life because they have taken people out of her life. And, rightfully so with David, he says, we're joining the traveling symphony, and if you don't let us, your friends are going to start disappearing, including Charlie and the baby. And
Right.
that was a line too far for Kirsten, and that's ultimately why I think she stabbed him.
Yeah. That's why, and I really want to know how do they know this stuff?
How did
So I was
which
start
how
like
who what?
how does David know about the book?
Hmm.
And how does David know about the book? How does David know about the symbol? How does David know not just that, but also that would somehow be triggering to her?
And how did he know that they performed 10 years ago on that one island with two the two plays that they played on that island? Like, how does he know all this?
I was starting with the last episode to, or at, when we were getting into this episode, and it seemed like there's no way there's actually a spaceman up there, and maybe we just have an unreliable narrator. We have a child going through something terrible. One of the few things she has is this book, and so she starts applying this book to this world.
Hmm.
And she's talking about Dr. 11 in the start of this episode and how he doesn't experience time the way that we do. And I'm very confused as to whether or not she's an unreliable narrator, or with these people who seem very real and not just part of her imagination, it does seem like there's some connections. Whether or not that means there's actually a spaceman and the book is true, it seems like they know things they shouldn't.
Yeah,
I'm so intrigued.
she tells Frank that this is the only copy of this book, and which I feel like if there was a printing of it, like one printing, they're not just going to print a single book, so there's probably multiple copies, I would say.
I Yes, I think so.
But the fact that like
Unless it hadn't gone to like mass print yet, unless that was like
test copy,
the test copy from the publisher, so she could see how does the cover look like, final print before
right?
like final draft
Yeah,
before the actual print.
but it doesn't explain how
Uh,
they would know.
exactly, and how David seemed to be keying in on her
Yes.
and saying things to her that were triggering.
Well, like the symbol. So we saw the symbol that of her tattoos that was in
Yes,
the sign
on the twigs.
on the
Yep.
twigs, and
Yeah,
also
yeah.
I don't know if you notice when she goes back to look at the blood, he
In the
wrote the
blood.
symbol in the blood. So he is definitely targeting Kirsten, but why?
I don't know, and I don't know if it's for good or for evil. Like, what his intentions are.
And do we think he's related to the guy from the Museum of Civilization?
Not directly. I do think that all of this is somehow tied together,
Yes.
but I don't think that he's from that group. And the tie, yeah, I don't think he's from that group. By the way, that group was also in and of itself interesting,
The
or at
Museum of
least that man was.
Civilization?
Yes,
He had a
yes,
scar on his head, a really noticeable scar.
and very odd shape too. Not, I don't feel
Not
like
like a
most scars. I feel like
gash.
most scars are, yes, exactly. Most scars follow like a more of like a line, maybe a little curvature, but
That scar looked like it was purposely cut into him to like a brand, like, part of a, you know, civilization, that makes all of their members have this. I don't know.
I thought it was interesting seeing how I don't think I saw anybody else dressed up in a suit in this episode. There's some interesting outfits. I think he's the only one that we see in a suit. And I love the fact that he is trying to look smart, like well dressed,
Mm-hmm.
put together, you know, making a good first impression for his group that has never come out into the open. But I also love that because it's post-apocalyptic, that suit was so terribly fitting.
Yeah,
it
it was bad.
was so appropriate that you would be like, I want to make a good impression, and that probably like 20 years after the events, that probably did make a good, probably did stick out.
Yeah. Well, and I do think it is important because when we are experiencing Hamlet, like as the audience is experiencing Hamlet, there's one point where they say something about a suit, and it cuts to him sitting in the audience watching, wearing his suit. So I think him overall wearing a suit is important, whether it be because this Museum of Civilization thinks that they're better than everyone and they are trying to return back to a form of the world. Part of me does think that it is connected to David and Cody, though.
Okay.
I don't know how, but either because it seems like David and Cody are trying to leave somewhere, right? They're like, we want to join the traveling symphony. You're going to let us, or your friends are going to disappear. So, like, either they're trying to escape the Museum of Civilization, or I don't know, but part of me does think that they're not separate.
Okay. This, the Museum of Civilization came off as interesting to me in that I feel like a new society has emerged, at least within the wheel, you know, where people live in encampments. There's a certain lifestyle that they're now embracing. Things seem very different, and they seem like they're accepting of this is the new life we're creating. Versus the Museum of Civilization seems like it is based very much in the past. And I wonder if that's part of a possible tension of the Museum of Civilization wanting to bring back civilization, you know, versus living in encampments with this kind of lifestyle, you know, but wanting to bring back the past, which possibly it was our past lifestyle that brought us to this situation.
Right. Yeah, and the interesting line that he said about we're a community that's been hidden, that we have not made ourselves known. Like, why have they been so reluctant? You would think that if you were trying to rebuild civilization, you would try to get as many people in society back on the train, you know, of rebuilding society. Why have they not made their presence known? And why do they want the traveling symphony there now?
Right. I think that that's like there's one of two options, maybe a combination of both. This could point at, once again, people have gone through terrible things, and so there's a certain level of distrust, and this group believes that if nobody knows about them, nobody will look for them, that makes them safer. Or there could be, you know, the idea that they are hiding their intentions because they don't know if people would agree with them, and that's why they're doing things in the dark. So either way, very interesting. Like, one paints a dark picture of what happened in this world, and one paints a dark picture of what their intentions are. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Do we have any lingering questions or theories?
Yeah, I've got lingering questions. I already kind of started one, which is how much of what we saw the last episode is real. At least that part at the end, you know, with Dr. 11. Is that just the imagination of a girl that was made to look real so we can see what she thinks of the world? Or did that happen? 2 years later, she's still talking about, you know, when the ship is fixed, I'm gonna go to
Jeevan.
Frank and Jeevan.
Oh, okay. I have a question.
Okay.
So in the recap of this episode, for the previous episode, she says to Jeevan, what's it like to have a brother? Then when she goes up to Sarah, she says, I remember my little brother, my younger brother, Frank.
Yeah.
Why is she
I was
saying
very confused by that.
Frank, who was Jeevan's brother, was her brother?
I think we'll still get more from the past to fill in these gaps. I don't think we're done with the past.
No. because we see little flashbacks of, we hear Jeevan knocking on the door. Frank, Frank, are you there? Talk to me, Frank. And then
Yep.
it does seem like there's another flashback of an intruder in Jeevan and
Yes.
Frank's room.
When they told her to run,
Right.
which I think might have been when she lost them.
Well, we know Jeevan. Well, because that was in the apartment still. We know
Okay.
Jeevan and her leave the apartment. So that's maybe when she loses Frank. But
Okay.
I think, because it sounds like her and Jeevan make it to Lake Michigan and they crossed the lake when it was frozen, which I don't know too much about the Midwest, but this also lends credence to the super freezing storm, because I don't think you can just walk across. Like, I know it freezes, but I don't know if anybody would be crazy enough to walk across it when it's frozen.
Right. I have no clue. I want so when they walk across, I do have that lingering question of what happened to Frank, and also, is he still around? I do think there is a chance that he's around. I don't think
But
that's necessarily the case with Frank, but I do think, because she did say that she looked in the window and there was no sign of him.
at the cabin for the ghost,
Yes.
because the one guy was saying, "Did you go to the cabin? Did you see any ghosts?" And she said, not this time." So
Yes.
you think Jeevan is still alive?
I don't necessarily. I think there is a possibility, which they have left it ambiguous.
For now.
So yes, for now. So we'll see. I do think that there is a very real possibility that he's still around. I don't think as strongly about Frank, but we'll see.
As many flashbacks as we've seen, I do think they will come back and fill in all those blanks, because that just seems like what would make sense. So I am really excited to see where this goes.
No.
It's a good one.
It is.
I
I'm
know.
loving the show. They're doing
So
a killer job. The story is so engaging. That okay with the facts. Like each story feels like a complete little story piece, that I don't feel like I'm being like all this information is being obscured from me, and that's a bad thing. Like, it's
yeah,
obviously that makes me want to watch the next episode like right now,
same.
but it doesn't just feel like a cheap trick where it's like, oh, let's just ignore this thing. Like, the story they're telling is a very interesting story,
Yeah,
and I am seeing hints. So it's not like they're completely ignoring
right.
the elephant in the room. We're definitely seeing aspects of it. I think it's told well. I think it's shot well. Love the music.
Loving the music, sound design, on point. Just everything about it is, it's really well done. Like you're saying, these episodes, it's not like I feel like, oh, they're just holding on information and we're not getting anything. Like, every episode we're getting full information, full character development. Like, it's so good. I love it.
I wonder if, so we weren't a huge fan of the needle drops in Dark Matter.
Right.
I feel like sound design wasn't as prominent in that show.
Mm-mm.
And so maybe when we would finally have a swell of music, it would seem out of place.
Right.
Versus there is prominent sound design in this show, and so if it goes from the score to a needle drop, it's not like swelling music is out of place. Also, I think the choice is better. I
Agreed.
think the songs have been on point.
We get like a folk band singing together on just like
Right?
instruments.
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
Yeah.
there is. I think it's a lot better, more well done in this show for sure. And yeah, like Dark Matter, all we like, I don't even remember anything outside of the needle drops other than the click, which was used indiscriminately. We don't even know why it was being
I
used.
don't even know.
So I'm loving this a lot better. I'm loving the show a lot more, and yeah, I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah. I mean, like you pointed out, in like you can hear like the tapping of the cell
Mm-hmm.
phone. I think I think there's a much bigger focus on sound design in this that I think makes it so that when you have something other than dialogue, it's not like, whoa, I'm not used to that.
Right, right.
You
Yeah,
know, it's a constant part of it versus I want to evoke this motion, and I think this song will do the heavy lifting. I guess that's the other part is you can't just expect the song to replace you doing the heavy lifting on the script, you know, and the directing and the cut. I think that the so like when in this episode when there's finally the reveal of how she finds out about her dad.
mm-hmm.
I think emotionally they had been building to that not just with music, but in seeing how she's responding to the people around her. She's in this very raw emotional state, and I think she's responding to people in kind of a short way, and you see her struggling with these emotions, and so like it builds that tension up the entire time. And so I think the music in this case is just helping. It's a like an equal partner
Yeah.
versus like I didn't write the strongest script and like cut it strongly in the editing room, and so I'm hoping this music can do the heavy lifting for me.
Right.
Like I think the music is just a beautiful complement
Yeah.
to all of the other hard work that happened.
Well, and it seems like with the traveling symphony, it's integral to the plot of the story, right? Like, you know, yeah, there's needle drops in previous episode. Symphony wasn't part of the story, but it does seem like music is an integral part of telling this story. So it makes more sense that the music be more on point, and like you said, just it's like a little accent that makes the
Right.
the show better.
Yeah. I think Sarah's very much embracing this new world. This is her 20th symphony. I think it's year 20, which to me sounds like every year she writes a new one, and that's very interesting. Like, is she exploring different concepts, or is she trying to encapsulate a year, or whatever she's doing? She's birthing something new in this
Mm-hmm.
world, and I think it's very befitting of these kind of communities that have created new life.
Yeah. No, yeah, I agree.
Maybe the book has been printed, maybe not. Maybe she was right that it wasn't printed. And if it wasn't printed, the only way that I can see that I can reconcile other people knowing without bringing in time machines, which she did say that Dr. 11 doesn't experience time the way that we do. So who knows? Maybe it's related to that. This doesn't seem like a time travel story.
Yeah.
Without superpowers, which who knows? Maybe somebody can see things.
We heard chemical fires, so maybe people got superpowers.
Maybe. And the one guy did say prophecy. So there, which is a word that generally has to do with like visions that people see. But if you wanted to use kind of a real world way of this happening without bringing in time travel and saying things, if Jeevan or Frank is still alive and they've had extensive discussions with somebody, you know, because it seems like they've been performing with this kid. I don't think that they're performers, which means and you said you saw like the helmet, so I think they've been performing this comic.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they're very familiar with it, and so maybe they've talked about it, and that's where that knowledge is coming from. Is that one of
Oh,
them is out there, and that is coming from information from that one person.
that makes sense. Okay, so maybe Jeevan. I'm still gonna say Jeevan
I'm gonna go Jeevan.
because we saw Jeevan and Kirsten leave, where Frank is. We
Yeah.
didn't see Frank leave the
So,
building, so
so I think that Jeevan is somehow related to people knowing about Station 11 when
that
there weren't other prints.
that could make sense because it does seem it implies that Jeevan is killed when before year 2 when she joins the traveling symphony. but also they could have just got separated. So maybe that's what happened. And we'll see
That's
Juven.
That's when I'm putting 5 on that theory.
I'll put 6 on that theory. All right. But with that, I feel our journey has come to an end. Thank you folks so much for joining along. Next week, come back. We will do Station 11, Episode 3. Until then, I'm Mark. This is Sterling.
Thanks.